Martin Wheatley, Head of the Financial Conduct Authority, thanks very much for being with us. You've talked a lot about replacing an ethic of obedience with an ethic of conduct. What do you mean by that?
Well, I think the old model, the ethic of obedience, was as long as we're compliant with a set of rules, then we're doing the right thing. And our view was, well, actually, rules never quite keep up with what actually happens in markets. You can still be delivering bad outcomes for consumers, even though the rules seem to allow you to do that. So you disclose lots of information because the rules say you should, but then you sell people the wrong product. And so what we're looking through to is if you have an ethic of care, you really care about people getting their needs met, not your needs met, not your sales processes.
And does that mean that you need to specify duties and responsibilities as well as rights?
To a degree. So, as you know, in the UK, we've always had a set of principles as well as a set of rules. And those principles are, we've got, as the FCA, we've got 11 high-level principles, which are things like treat your customers fairly, don't give them misleading information. And they're fairly high level, but we use those as much when we have to enforce, as much as we do rules.
But one of your predecessors, Hector Sanz, very famously said, well, I firmly believe in the value of principles-based regulation, but it doesn't work with people with no principles.
And well, I think that's true, which is why we need both. And the thing that I think we would all admit now is you can't just rely on a set of principles and then stand back and expect that everybody will follow. You've got to test and check and prod, and when you find failures, you've got to make an example of those failures. But you can't simply stand back and expect everybody to simply accept those principles, and therefore the regulator doesn't have much else to do.
And what does the regulator have to do in terms of articulating what adherence to those principles mean in practice?
Well, again, it's one of those things, it's easy to talk about ethics, and we spend a lot of time talking about it. Most people, even the banks where we have problems, talk about ethics. What we have to show is we hold a mirror up to them and say, look, you've talked about this, here's what's happening in practice. You've told me, CEO, this is what you believe for your firm, here's what's happening in your trading room. So our approach, if we trust the management of organisations, is to play back to them where they're falling short, and if we don't, we remove them.
And in that case then, does that create the circumstances whereby one can prosecute on the basis of deceptive, misleading, unconscionable conduct if in actual fact practice is at variance from stated values?
Yes, so what we have found in some of the bigger cases that we have prosecuted, so obviously LIBOR is the one that everybody knows about now. More recently we had the gold case. In each case, what we prosecuted on wasn't a set of rules that were breached, it was overall principles that weren't followed. And so we do use that, and we use it very actively in our enforcement approach.
So let's talk about the LIBOR scandal and associated manipulation scandals. Do you think, has the issue been dealt with, or is there more to come?
I'd like to be able to say the issue has been dealt with, because clearly what happened in LIBOR was around the 2008 vintage, where there were lots of bad things happening in markets. But the truth is, our current investigations relate to recent activities in the last 2 years. So they relate to things that, frankly, people should have known better, having seen what's happened with LIBOR, but actually the practices are still present. And that's a disappointment, and it's unfortunate, but we'll flush those out as well.
Disappointment, unfortunate. People might think that's an inappropriate response, or not a response which is sufficient given the severity of the crisis.
The difficulty, frankly, is a lot of the activity that we're seeing now is not in what's traditionally been a regulated space. So all of us, every jurisdiction has a legal structure it has to work within, and we have a legal structure we have to work within. That dictates what is within our power to oversee, and some things are not within our power. And so in a sense, we rely therefore on the banks to oversee the non-regulated part in the same way that they would oversee the regulated part. And so the disappointment is that, well, they've just not done that, which is why we've had to go in and take quite strong action.
Now, they haven't done that because they're unwilling to do it, or they're incapable of doing it. Is it a consequence of very complex organisations, that these organisations are too complex for anybody to know what's going on?
In reality, I think it's all of those. Obviously, if people are unwilling to do it, then we take a really tough line with those. Very often, and it's a bandwidth question. There's a lot of change that we're working through at the moment, and within, particularly in the trading rooms of most investment banks, there are subcultures that exist, and that subculture is different whether you're in the credit derivatives desk, or whether you're in the spot forex desk or the commodities desk. But all of those subcultures have traits which have been developed over a number of years, sometimes decades, which under today's microscope just don't stand scrutiny. And all of them need to be addressed. And I guess the issue is how quickly you get around to addressing all of those subcultures.
Now, up to now, in a lot of the investigations that we've seen into LIBOR and associated benchmark manipulation scandals, the emphasis has been on individual institutions.
Yes.
Now, the European Union Competition Directorate has taken a different approach and viewed this holistically, and has suggested that in actual fact what we're witnessing is widespread collusion, institutionalized corruption, and in actual fact a cartel at the heart of global banking. That's a deeply worrying development.
Yes, it is, and I think that's exactly what's happened. There are a number of cartels, so I think what you have seen is the cartels in the LIBOR space have now come out, and the European Commission has taken action against those. It's now clear that there are potential cartels in other space, so Forex is the next area that we're looking at. And so you're absolutely right, there are failures at an institutional level, failures at an individual level, and failures at an industry level. But frankly, we've got to work through them, we've got to flush those out before we can start to rebuild trust.
And to rebuild trust, do we have to get an acceptance by industry that the old way of working is no longer not simply fit for purpose, but it's actually not sustainable?
Yes, we do. And there were a number of speeches recently in London at the Sustainable Finance Conference which talked about the fact that actually this model is failing society, and if it doesn't reform, it will implode upon itself. And you'll get different models built up, but our traditional banking model is failing society at the moment.
And at that conference, there was a suggestion that there was, in actual fact, major industry kickback by Christine Lagarde. She suggested that rising inequality was at the root of all social evil, quoting very favourably Pope Francis in this regard. Obviously, we've also had the Archbishop of Canterbury being a very active player in the space in London. And a suggestion by that Parliamentary Commission on Banking Standards that if we don't take firm action now, when the reality of how dangerous and how corrosive the behaviour of the institutions have been, we risk sleepwalking into a disaster. As the person in charge of the Financial Conduct Authority, do you sleep at night?
I do sleep at night, but that's not to say I don't take worries home with me every night. There is pushback, so you're absolutely right. So for many parts of the industry, they're saying, actually, we want to get back to lending. And of course, we do want people to lend. We want credit to be available. And all of this regulatory baggage and focus on conduct and rules is stopping us doing that. And clearly, we do want people to get back to lending. We want banking to serve the industry, but we want to serve it in a clean way. So in an essence, the balance, or the issue for us is achieving that balance as to how we allow the industry to deliver to society what it needs to do, which is largely a credit transformation process, but do that in a way that's safe and secure, and we're not quite at that stage yet.
Martin Wheatley, thank you very much.
Thank you.